It's now time for this month's broadcast of Learning Now TV.
Welcome to February's Learning Now TV. Kate, tell us, how are you and what's on?
Well, February can be a bit of a dull month. You know, it's snowing where you are. It's still dark out. My goodness, the UK has been hit by these winds with Storm Eunice in the last week or so. But we're here to give you a spring into your step as the daffodils come up and we head into March. So today we've got Amy Brand talking about habits and forming habits, which is something very dear to my heart. I think that level of consistency and quality can really revolutionize how you work or your practice around certain areas. I spoke to Gemma Towersey, who was crowned Learning Designer of the Year at the Learning Technologies Awards just before Christmas. She's somebody I've known for a very long time, and she's going to tell us about how she's honed her craft around learning design. And we're also joined by our friend and part of the family, Martin Cousins, who is talking about a new research report on sustainability and why it is going to impact the workplace and learning and development sooner than you might think.
Yes, and we're not incredibly forward in championing sustainability in L&D, so it's a kind of wake-up call report. Anyway, enjoy the show.
It's about time that I had a conversation with Amy Brand again. It's been far, far too long. And I'm delighted that she's agreed to join me today. And the topic that we're going to talk about relates to her role. Amy is the Director of Synaptic Potential. That's all about the brain. And what we're going to focus on today is learning habits, what we can do with our brain and in our brain to make learning more effective and to make learning habits that really resonate and help us. So, Amy, talk about learning habits. What's a learning habit? And then talk about some of those habits.
Well, from our perspective, a learning habit is something that you are doing on a regular basis that is going to help to get the information into your brain, help to catalog it in a helpful way and make it easier for it to be recalled, to get it out again. Really basic from a learning perspective, but something that we don't always think about. Sometimes we just enter into a process of learning, of trying to accrue a new skill or get some new information, like learn a new language, whatever it might be. And we just dive into it and start sort of muddling our way through. But actually, it may be that we are setting ourselves up for it to be a far harder journey than it needs to be. And actually, it may be nowhere near as effective at the end of it. So by winding back a minute and just thinking, okay, this is my outcome, whatever it looks like. How am I going to make this transition, change my brain structurally so that it can do this new thing, or so it can recall this new thing, whatever that looks like. And when we look at how our brain actually learns, it points us in the direction of these opportunities for these different types of habits that are going to make the whole process easier. So as you've alluded to, there are many different things that we can do. And we encourage people to think about before they start learning, during the learning itself, and after any learning has taken place.
So let's do that. So, can we go back?
Yeah.
And so let's talk about, because every single person listening to this interview would love to be better at learning, would love to be a more effective learner. Guaranteed, absolutely guaranteed. So let's start with your before. What do we do before the learning to make the experience more resonant, stick better, recall easier, whatever it might be?
So one of the main things that you can do is priming the brain. So here we want to clearly articulate what we're trying to achieve, actually get that goal nicely packaged up, we can see it, and then by activating the what's in it for me, the why am I doing this, we're going to immediately flood the brain with different neurochemicals that are going to make it easier for the networks in the brain to switch on, that are going to make us more receptive to that information. So you just contrast feeling negative and despondent and like what's in front of you is a big uphill struggle, and how you'd actually feel then looking at something that you need to learn or practicing something that you need to practice, versus thinking about the future you that's got all of these new capabilities and skill sets under your belt, and what that means for you, and practically how life will be better if you've got that. And immediately, like, it resonates, doesn't it?
Yes.
You can feel how that would be different and how the second would be preferable and make things easier.
You're absolutely right. Now, I can do that by kind of writing it down and being very formal, but can I also do it by just reflecting, just by thinking about it in my head and just imagining that future state where I've acquired that skill, and and you can let your imagination run wild. I got that new skill, which got me a better job, which allowed me to do things that I couldn't have done before, that allowed me to meet more interesting people. Boom, 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 boom. Can you do it by just thinking it through?
Yeah, of course. You can do it by thinking it through. And what we'd encourage is anyone in these kind of roles, good teachers do it naturally. You can do it in a moment. You can do it by posing a question to your students, to those in front of you. Anytime that you've got the opportunity to just land something in a different way, just prime someone, open someone up, frame something in a different way for an individual, whether we're doing it for ourselves or whether we're doing it for those that we're working with, start by that framing, that priming, that getting people receptive, opening them up, getting their brain in the right state, the most helpful state, for then the next stage where you're going to input the information.
Good. All right. And then, so during, now we've done that. We've thought ourselves into being optimistic with high expectations and not depressed and miserable. We've done that. So what do we do during the learning?
So during the learning, you've got to clear your bandwidth. So the goal here is to get the information into your brain, but in a normal environment, there is so much information competing through all of our senses to try and get into our brain and to get that prime real estate in there. So what you need to do is clear it enough that then what you're trying to put in has got a strong chance that it can be focused on. And my daughter does this beautifully. She illustrates the absence of this beautifully at times. She gets to do a times table square every week. And they're brutal kind of experiences, going through writing, 120 different times tables. And sometimes she'll just pause and I'll say, have you forgotten that one? She'll go, no, just daydreaming. And it's normal and natural, but if we want the information to go in, and if we want it to go in the most efficient way possible, then we've got to be able to focus. We've got to be able to switch on our task positive network and turn down our default mode network, which wants to do all that beautiful mind wandering. There's a place and a time. But so again, it kind of comes into preparation in terms of what do you need to get rid of from your immediate focus in order to allow you to zone into what's in front of you. But in the moment, you've then got to be disciplined and good at pushing away those external additional thoughts to zone back in. And frankly, we see the older you get, the harder it becoming. So it's a discipline. You can get better at it, but I think we just seem to be more open to all these different inputs. And
we're overwhelmed by notifications flooding up on the screen. I've switched off my notifications because I want to focus on listening to you. But if they came on silently, I would unavoidably start looking at them, and then your brain wanders, and I've forgotten what on earth you just said, and then we get completely lost. So it's those practical things like, do not sit there with notifications, don't sit there with the web browser open or with news popping up, crawling across the screen. Clear your mind, but also clear your desktop and have space to learn. Yeah.
Yeah, with both of those. So there's always the internal, so the being able to potentially write down beforehand, yes, I know I've got to think about the dinner tonight. Yes, I know the washing needs to go on, whatever it is, note those down so that you're taking them out of your head,
Yes.
but also physically around you, as you've said, you know, what notifications might pop up, what people might walk by, you know, that just sort of give you a phrase, oh, you know, I want to speak to you in a minute. And you think, then you're worrying over, what do they want to speak to me about? So yeah, physical distractions and mental distractions.
Yes.
So that would be the middle phase that you really want to get clear on so that the information can come in.
Yeah, I think that makes an awful lot of sense. And we just often just stumble into learning without even preparing anything. And preparation is the key. Preparation before, as we've just described, then preparation in the learning process itself. Now, what about after? So we've done our stint. What do we need to do next?
So after is almost, not quite, but almost the most important phase, and it's where we can go so wrong. So the first thing I'll recommend is the traditionally unsexy recommendation of sleep. We need sleep, we need more of it than most people are getting, and if you do not sleep well, you will not consolidate what you are trying to embed. So in an ideal world, you take a little power nap after you've learned something, and for some, that might be possible. I certainly have done it at many stages of my life, but at the very least, be getting a good night's sleep to allow the information to be catalogued and processed in your brain. Also, then we want to recall information. It's risen in popularity over the last few years. There is so much evidence that it is the best way to learn, but there are still many initiatives, programs that are built that don't have it at the core. And it makes no sense not to be recalling or strategically building into a learning journey this recall on a regular basis. And I don't know why it's not everywhere the way it should be, but if you're doing anything for yourself or with others where you're expecting learning to occur, then you definitely need to be building in this recall, which is not getting them to read something again or watch something again. It's extract the information from them that they should have digested. And you want there to be gaps in the knowledge. You want there to be challenge. You want there to be struggle, wrestling, you know, oh gosh, oh, it's on the tip of my tongue. That, you know, I'm so close. That's perfect. That's a really good learning environment. And it can be uncomfortable to watch, and the temptation is to just give the answer, but what we want is that wrestling, that discomfort, that processing, because the brain is searching and it's strengthening those neural connections. And so everything that we're talking about here is actually in service of building more myelinated pathways in the brain, which is the key for learning. So it's got a really good scientific foundation. It makes total sense, and there are more, you know, practical things that you can do, but these would be the foundations that I would focus in on to you know, level up learning.
So take time to think about what you think you've learned. Try and recall it. Either write it down or just go through your head, and where there are gaps, you can go back. But so much of our world is based on never reflecting. Just, right, I've done that, I'll move on to the next thing. And of course, the first thing just falls out of your head because you haven't made any effort to consolidate that learning. So again, I think this is really good advice. These are very simple things, but profoundly important. If you can do all three of them, about that envisioning and preparation, that clearing clutter so you can actually focus and concentrate, and then review, reflect, and try to recall. All of those things would make us all better learners, I think. I'm really very, very grateful to you for summarizing something that is, on the one hand, it's obvious, but it's so little practice, isn't it? And it needs someone like you to say, think about these things, and the research is all there to justify it and to reinforce it.
Yeah, it's to justify it, I think, is so important sometimes, because we can be tempted to you know, rush through and think, how am I going to just add value with this learning journey? So let's just content, for example. But some of the really good learning experiences out there have got these components built into them. And I think that's just our campaign, is to make sure people involved in learning and developing people have got access to the scientific insight that says, look, this is what's actually happening. Therefore, these are the practical things that you can do so that it will be easier and you're justified in suggesting a particular approach to the powers that be. You know, you want them to understand we are shaping something so that people can have the best experience, but it can also be the most efficient and effective possible. So yeah, do it.
Yeah, and I suppose that ultimately to turn learning into something that's pleasurable, not something that is really tortuous and difficult. And it can be pleasurable, you've proved that. Amy, we're going to put on the screen a link to Synaptic Potential, to your website. And I would suggest that anyone who's listening to what Amy has got to say and would like to know more, they should go straight to the website, and you can contact Amy through the website if you'd like more information about any aspect of this. So Amy, it's so good to talk to you. That's really intensely practical, but fundamentally important in an age where we all have to learn. To not understand those fundamentals puts us at a great big deficit, and it's relatively easy to do. So Amy, I'm really pleased to have had the chance to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time.
It was a pleasure, Nigel.
Growing your people can get pretty messy, but degreed learning experience makes it neat by giving your workforce the flexibility to learn when, where, and how they want, and giving you the power to guide their growth, so you can solve today's challenges while building the skills to take on tomorrow.
Robin is back, and he has the hot news du jour, which is the TikTok decision at the beginning of the year to sack its entire talent team. Not because they weren't doing a good job, it's that they weren't doing a fantastic job. Lots of interesting debate around that topic, Kate.
So much. I mean, it's really lit up my socials, I have to say. We covered it from an editorial perspective, and it's provoked a lot of conversation and reflection. And I think that some of the comments were just so almost brutal, really. And, you know, you often talk about holding up a mirror to the profession. And I think this holds up a pretty unglamorous and unfairly, not unfairly, but not very, you know, the lighting's not good in it. You know, it's a tricky one. So, and I know that Robin will have a really, really great opinion on this. So I'm excited.
I'm excited too.
You may have missed the story about TikTok owner ByteDance over the Christmas period, and the fact that they had decided to completely do away with their talent development department. Despite employing 60,000 people and having quite a big graduate recruitment scheme, they thought they didn't need any learning and development again. And my immediate thought on hearing that story was, this is a terrible thing, and doesn't it just show these social media organisations are slashing costs to the bone in order to chase after the profits while they can, and anything which doesn't contribute immediately to the bottom line has to go. And of course, learning and development is first in the firing line. But I decided to investigate a little bit further, and I looked into the information, which is all in the public domain. I don't have any special inside track here. But what I found out is, number one of the cultural values of ByteDance is keep growing, keep learning. So this idea that learning is of four things which they stand for, one of those is around learning and employee development, seems to me to be entirely positive. So why did they then close the talent development team? Well, it seems to be an issue around quality. So if you look at the information which has been put out and reported in the press, then you can see that there were some fundamental challenges here. We had materials and programs which were of, quote, limited practical value. We had things which were disconnected from the company's needs, and things which were described as self-indulgent feel-good initiatives, which doesn't feel to me like it's ringing with praise, really, does it? In fact, some of those programs they were running, particularly in response to the pandemic and people being closed down from face-to-face sessions, were quote-unquote mediocre quality online talks with over 1,000 attendees. So maybe what the issue here was that people had gone down a route of promoting using videos, whether those were streaming or recorded videos, and broadcasting lots and lots of content. But without locating that content in either the requirements or aspirations of individuals or the requirements and ambitions of the company. And so we ended up with this statement. This is an illusion of growth. It is easy to get carried away in the false impression that employees are growing professionally when they are not. And this is unhealthy and even harmful to both employees and the company. So it would be easy to think that in the scramble to adapt to new ways of working as a result of not being able to run face-to-face, ByteDance had just lost its way in terms of the talent development activities that it was involved in. They pushed out lots of video, not unsurprisingly, given what they do for a living, and they'd hosted lots of webinars and seminars in an attempt to keep talent development going. But what they'd done, of course, was just pumped out content, not related to or engaged with anything that the individuals needed nor the company needed. Just small-scale online events pushed out to as many people as possible in something which represents, I'm sure we'll all agree, a bit of a sheepdip. Now, maybe that was because they were scrambling to get things onto the schedule and onto the programme in the light of not being able to run things face-to-face. Or maybe, just maybe, that's what they were doing all along. And the difference is now it is transparent to anybody who wants to drop into a webinar or watch one of those videos. So maybe they've just adapted and changed pretty poorly, made some mistakes and paid the price. Or maybe they were always poor. They were always doing things which weren't going to work. They were always going to be generating content rather than delivering learning. And as a result, they've been found out because now it's available in the public sphere and people can look at it and draw their own conclusions. Maybe, just maybe, the ByteDance management are onto something. And rather than being some kind of Luddite organisation that doesn't believe in development, actually maybe they believe in development a lot and they don't think this is it. A sobering message for all of us.
For my first interview of 2022, I couldn't be more thrilled to welcome Gemma Towersey onto Learning Now Television. Gemma and I have known each other more years than we would probably care to count between us. Met many, many years ago when we both worked for a learning management system company, Calidus. I was in the marketing team and Gemma had joined as an instructional designer. So since then, we've obviously both spread our wings. Gemma has flown very far afield on some of her expeditions and with some of her work experience, but she joins us today as current crowned Learning Designer of the Year at the Learning Technologies Awards. So really, really thrilled to welcome her today and talk about all things learning design. Thank you for coming, Gemma.
Thanks for having me.
So obviously, one of the things that we were talking about just before we came on air was the kind of that journey and that evolution from instructional design through to, well, your title now is Learning Experience Manager. So it's quite a different feel. And it feels to me, as somebody who's been around L&D but not a designer herself, that the craft, many of the skills within it have stayed the same, but it really has evolved, hasn't it, since we met all those years ago?
Yes, it really has. When I first started working for Calidus, we had a small team which included a developer. So he was actually physically coding the learning that I'd scripted out into a Word document. And it was, although we were obviously trying to move away, but I mean, e-learning back then was quite a lot of click next. It perhaps wasn't nearly as performance focused as online materials are now. I mean, definitely now we think with that, what do actually people need to do in their jobs? And we use Kathy Moore's action mapping. It's very much performance over just giving you some learning. So we have a mix of online, maybe some content, but very much it's built around what actually can we do to support you to do your job. So there might be more job aids, or there might be more in the moment resources. So it's very much shifted from just a piece of a really dense piece of 1 hour content delivery to smaller bites, but that are all focused. It's really streamlined into, okay, what do you actually need to do?
And so at Mind Tools for Business, as part of the Emerald Group, obviously you have a really, it's quite a sizable team there, but I believe that you work quite closely with your insights team, so you can actually become more evidence-based in what you're doing, and then feed that back into the next experience that you design for somebody. So can you explain a little bit more how that works?
Yeah, for sure. When we speak to clients in the early stages of scoping, we always talk about how are they going to know that this has been a success? And then we really try and encourage them to allow us to build in ways of measuring impact. So it's not just happy sheets. we don't do those. It's not just learner satisfaction, but we try and go up the impact scale. So has the learning actually changed performance? Has it actually had an impact on the business, and what we define at that early stage as the reason why we're doing this piece of content or performance support. So we work with our business, with our insights team, and they help us design surveys or whatever it is that we're going to use to measure impact and to track that. So we're really pushing for that, to make sure that what we're doing is working, and if it's not, then we can really drill into why not, and then make some changes and then test it again. So it's virtuous loop.
And so is that kind of more the way of things now with these projects? It's more iteration, it's more tweaking, testing, nudging, rather than here's your piece of content, see you later.
Yeah, and much faster turnaround as well. So get it in front of users really early on. Get early designs in front of user testing. So very much more iterative, and then it gets to the client faster, because obviously people need things right now, and then we'll come back to it. Obviously, when you're looking at behaviors, you have to give it time for those behaviors to embed and for people to change. So we try and measure impact at a date in the future, but then come back to it and have those discussions about what might need to change.
Nice. So the timelines of a project are completely different then, really?
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. We can turn around things much, much faster now. I mean, no one's coding it. When we personally use an authoring tool, but obviously we bring in media and lots of other things, but the timescales, really compressed.
And has that increased, obviously, in the backdrop of the pandemic and everything changing? Change is constant, isn't it, at the moment? Have you seen those timelines sort of pressured and truncated?
Absolutely, much faster, different, sometimes there's been different focuses as well, so a bit more focus on well-being, helping people to just pivot to different types of working, but in general, just an uptick in business really as well, which is great. That is,
it is interesting. And so that within that demand, I was going to say there's two strands to this question really. What are the topics that you're seeing that demand for, and then what are some of the channels or media that you are pulling in to create that learning experience?
I mean obviously the topics are really quite client specific, so there's not been a general shift to particular types or particular topics, as it were. They're still very much again performance focused, so it's what do those people need
in that unique context. So it's still very bespoke.
I'd say so. I mean, there's obviously still compliance needs, so that people are more, well, are still obviously focused on those. And then within those, maybe there's some, maybe not legislative compliance, but like I say, kind of well-being and helping people to manage their own working environments, and then how you kind of manage life and work when you're in the same building the whole time. A bit more focus around coaching perhaps as well.
Nice.
And then what's your second question?
The kind of the types of media, some of the different channels, I mean, in my head, I guess I always think about like a learning journey. So what are the different elements and parts of that journey that you might pull in to keep me engaged and interested along the way?
Yeah, well, I mean, when you talk about learning journeys, things, we might start with a diagnostic quiz, and then we can bring in animations to hook you in. We always have a bit, well, not always, but we can use audio and lots of videos, like short bites that people can download and watch again, or you can have as separate assets that you can deliver. It isn't just this, okay, sit in front of a piece of text-based content, nice graphics, lots of infographics. So yeah, assets that kind of work and that can work standalone as well. So, or you might have downloadable resources too. And certainly as a team, we're really getting into VR now as well. So who knows what that might bring? But
oh my goodness,
really
that's exciting. What sort of stuff are you looking at with that?
So we're using it actually as part of our work. So we're having our one-to-ones or our team meetings in a virtual office, which has been it's been a really it's a completely different experience to being on Teams or Zoom. I think you feel like you're looking at that person and you're with that person, so that element of trust and being able to talk more openly and to sense what they're feeling, because you can see their hand gestures, and you can sort of, you can see that upper half, but they're moving like they would in real life, so you really feel a better connection with people than when you're on a screen.
Oh, wow.
So there's thought around, okay, how can you use this experience to understand better, maybe how to have difficult conversations, or I guess equality and diversity. So there's some stuff around that that no doubt it will be useful for. But there's also some really beautiful narrated animations that are also interactive in there, so you can sort of immerse yourself in these gorgeous worlds, and it makes you think in a completely different way as well, because obviously you're completely surrounded by the environment, so you can see how there's so much potential there.
That sounds very exciting. I would love to see that. I'm quite skeptical, so but I'm always happy to be proven wrong. Yeah. And then in terms of your awards, your Gold Award for Learning Designer of the Year, very exciting. I watched you receive that back in November. What was it? Obviously it's a hard question because you're a very humble person, but what was it that you kind of brought to the table that you think maybe helped towards that award?
Yeah, I think and as a team as well, not just me, but we're really good at working with our clients to get to the bottom of what it is that they need, and to recognize as well what's important to them. So, I work with International Baccalaureate, for instance, and their pedagogical approaches are really important, and they want to bring them into the way that we design the training that we do for their teachers. So those principles are really important, and because they're really good educational principles as well, we try and bring them in and reflect them in how we help teachers improve their performance. So yeah, I think that's part of it.
Fantastic. So I think I think as we close out, it's interesting to ask you, there are loads of amazing designers in the L&D world, and obviously you're doing, you're still, there's those core kind of foundational skills that you've got there. So those listening skills, those writing skills, those creative skills. what would you, if you had one piece of advice for anyone watching this who wants to kind of expand their practice around learning experience design, what would that be?
Oh, well, actually, right now, as a team, we've got a little book club around Julie Dirkson's Designed for How People Learn, and so I'd really recommend that as a brilliant starting point for appreciating what good learning design is. So that's where I'd start focusing, and then writing is a really important part of it. So how you speak to people through your words. It's conversational, it's a dialogue. You are speaking to real people out there. So and I think that's something else to start looking at as well, is creating a dialogue between you and your learner.
And if you want to be a writer, you have to practice writing. You know, there's no sort of shortcut to that, is there?
No. Yeah. So they're the places I'd start is
fabulous.
Learning design and writing. Yes.
Fabulous. Well, Julie's a great friend of the show. Absolutely love her work. So do check out Julie if you can. But in the meantime, Gemma, thank you so much for talking to us. You're very, very humble. I'm in absolute awe of everything that you've achieved and the boundaries that you're still pushing. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Nice to speak to you, Kate.
Maybe we'll do that later. Hey, so you can see this is just like using a whiteboard in a classroom. And then you do my 3-year-old's favourite, you just have a nice little wiggle. 1, 2, 3, rate it now.
A really quick question, you might want to answer this later.
We see, I love this.
Next up, as ever, it's our man with the roving microphone. Well, I suppose a little bit more now. He's able to get out and about. I'm not sure the microphone has done too much travelling in the last 2 years, but Rob Clark from Learning News brings us his roundup.
What's hot in learning and development in 2022? The L&D Global Sentiment Survey puts this question to the L&D profession. The results are out, and we've got the answer. The winners of the 2022 Learning Awards were announced last week. Learning Provider of the Year went to the social impact learning company AARP. We'll have a news roundup of the winners. What else might 2022 hold for the learning sector? We will put this question to the Managing Director of City and Guilds Corporate Learning, Andy Moss. The results from the L&D Global Sentiment Survey 2022 are out and show a small decrease in the focus on reskilling and upskilling and a rise in non-technical approaches to L&D, such as collaborative and social learning, coaching and mentoring and consulting.
Reskilling and upskilling down from 13% last year to 12.5%. Still a very big number, but it is a decrease. And whereas it was number one across every work group last year, it's not number one in education this year. So the unanimity of support isn't quite there on reskilling. Elsewhere, we've seen a slight increase this year in non-technical approaches, such as collaborative and social learning, coaching and mentoring. But it's only a very slight increase. But if you look at those over 2 years, then you'll see there is a substantial increase in support for those two options over 2 years. At the same time, support for learning analytics and learning experience platforms has fallen away. They're not as enthusiastically supported as they were. The one that got the most impetus was the engagement of learners. And the problem here is that we have an environment in which people are being asked to work typically harder, typically at a greater pace, and they are finding it tiring working online a lot. Again and again, the phrasing came up that they found, the learning and development people answering the survey found that the people they were trying to support were overworked, rushed, the pace of work was too much, there was Zoom fatigue. These were regular phrases that cropped up again and again. And of all those 5 buckets, engagement, accounting for something like 13 to 14% of the answers, was the most heavily backed.
I last spoke to Andy Moss, the CEO of City & Guilds Corporate Learning, which includes the Kineo digital learning business, during the first week of the first lockdown, just as City & Guilds were closing training centres all over the country, and while trying to keep staff safe and the business afloat. It was one of the interviews that I did that week that brought home what the learning sector was facing, and that learning itself was about to undergo a substantial change, possibly the biggest change in our lifetimes. To see how Kineo and the wider group has fared over the course of the pandemic, and to look ahead to what 2022 might have in store, Andy Moss is back on Learning News today. Andy, very warm welcome back to Learning News.
Thanks, Rob. Great to be back with you, and great to see you safe and well after, as you say, I can't believe it's 2 years since we last did our interview, and really good to be here with you.
Thank you. Now, of course, we're right at the start of 2022. What's going to be important this year, Andy?
So at the macro level, I think this big trend that we're seeing, this need for organisations and for individuals to understand the skills that they have in ways that probably weren't as well kind of matured as we would all like them to be, and to start to match their skills kind of strategy, if you like, with their L&D strategy. So to bring the two together to really start to do active planning for how you develop and grow the talent that you've got in your organisation, how you can support individuals to progress and grow in their careers. I think that's been a big shift that we're seeing, and certainly a big focus of conversations that I have with the organisations that we work with. We know our learners are looking for and looking to their organisations to actually understand where their values sit in the whole development agenda, and those organisations that are really placing employee experience and the learner experience at the forefront, and certainly will succeed in that kind of talent war that we all face, actually, as we think about recruiting the talented individuals and capabilities we want for the future. So I think a real focus on quality, and it's certainly something here at Kineo we're absolutely putting front of mind. We really want to ultimately be held accountable, and be able to demonstrate how we quantifiably improve the outcomes of the learners that are coming onto our programs. And that means, a number of things that have to back that, really. So firstly, a really clear understanding of what is the learning outcome that we're trying to accomplish. Secondly, really thinking deeply about how then we can create a learner and an employee experience that's exciting, engaging, and ultimately helps embed the kind of learning and development opportunities that will achieve the outcomes. But then really importantly, again, how you measure and how can you hold yourself accountable to demonstrate that that's actually happened. We as an industry really have the opportunity and the need to step forward now and really show that we can do this, and do this really, really well.
The Learning Awards 2022 took place last week, returning live to London to celebrate all of the winners in person. 2022 is the 26th year that the awards have taken place. They were hosted by Claudia Winkleman and included a charity auction for the Dreamflight Children's Charity. On to a quick roundup of some of this year's winners. Learning Company of the Year went to the non-profit social impact learning provider AARP. Learning Team Gold went to ABM Industries. The Learning Leader of the Year was Lisa Johnson from NHS Blood and Transplant. Ashivard Lobo, L&D Manager at Air Arabia, won Learning Professional of the Year. And Federico Pasici from GDS Group won the 2022 Rising Star Award. Startup Learning Provider Gold went to the specialist L&D marketing agency Mars Marketing, founded by Ashley Sinclair and Hannah Wadhams. Learning Platform Gold was picked up by Intuition. Learning Impact Gold Award went to the digital learning provider Growth Engineering. And the Colin Corder Award for their outstanding contribution to learning went to Satnam Sargu from British Red Cross. The full list of all of the gold, silver and bronze winners and the finalists is on the website. And we'll have some of this year's winners on Learning News over the next few weeks to talk about their work. So do keep an eye out for that, and I do hope you will join us for those interviews. Thank you very much for your company today. See you next time.
In the L&D world, we all know our biggest challenge is knowledge fade and demonstrating ROI from our training interventions. At Elephants Don't Forget, we use artificial intelligence to guarantee that what you train your employees, they learn and retain. If you are looking to transform the impact your training content has in your business, improve the ROI, and perhaps help employees learn and retain even the dull regulatory material, drop me a line at nelly@elephantsdon'tforget.com.
There's always an exciting moment in the program when we turn to the newest, the most exciting research reports that we can put our hands on. So Martin, what have you chosen for us today? What are we looking at?
Thanks, Nigel. I hope it is exciting, everyone. Today we are going into climate change. So we've gone a bit left field, but I can't help thinking this is obviously the topic that is going to affect everything, whether it's going to be happening in the near term, medium term, or longer term. It is going to affect how we work, how work is done, and in many ways, our behaviours in and around work. A corporate climate crisis by an agency called Play, who predominantly make or design gamified experiences for corporates. So they've asked 1,000 people, that's made up of 750 employees, 250 sort of business leaders and sustainability officers in the UK. So it's UK focused, just about climate change, really. And the focus here is on the sort of behaviour changes that we might need to see in the future, and also how people see climate change at work currently, what that means for them in their kind of day-to-day routines.
Yep, good, excellent. So it's a substantial report. I think it's got a lot of good ideas and it's got some pretty strong conclusions. Highlight some of them for us, Martin.
I think I'm just going to refer to some of my notes just down here. I think importantly, 3/4 of those surveyed agree that major behavioural changes are necessary in ensuring that individuals and companies and countries can achieve their sustainability goals. So it's that, you know, most people are on board with the fact that something's got to change, and it's not just someone else's responsibility, it is the individual's responsibility.
And there's this one that more than 2/3 of employees, 68%, feel that it's important that they work for a company that is committed to acting sustainably. Now, if I was a CEO, I'd sit up, there's a real opportunity there, and we're worried about staff retention and the great resignation. If you consciously demonstrate your commitment, if you bring staff into sharing and working with you on that commitment, everybody wins. You get more loyal staff who are more engaged with the business is more stable, plus you're doing the right thing, and you're building continuity and sustainability into your products and services. It seems fantastic and obvious, and everybody wins. What do you think, Martin? Is that credible to you? Does that work to you?
I think that's quite a big takeaway from this piece of research. If that's what people are saying, then I think it's just in the mix for talent leaders and business leaders. I mean, talent management right now is a massive challenge. I mean, as you said, there are huge skill shortages in the UK and across the world, really. And I think this is just another factor in the kind of whole attraction to your organization and what's going to keep you there, and what's that whole idea of the purpose of the business, I think, is going to be built a lot more around sustainability than it has been previously. So I think, you know, the research says, for example, that 77% agree that companies should be more transparent about their environmental impact and how they need to improve.
Yes.
I think, a part of this research is saying that communication is massively important. So it's going to be about the employee value proposition externally, if you like, but also it's going to be very much an internal thing. It's like, well, what is this organization doing? What are people doing? Where is this going? What's the vision? And how is it being communicated to people so that people understand that this organization is doing something about sustainability?
To me, this is almost like a gift on a plate. It's a checklist of the things that companies should be thinking about right now to engage their employees and make them feel like the company cares even just a little bit about the climate. So saying that 39% of respondents feel that companies they work for should make changes to their operations and business model to ensure improved sustainability. Now, these are not incredibly revolutionary statements, nor are they incredibly difficult to engineer. It's basically be more conscious, be more transparent, communicate better, seek help from your employees. And as I said before, you end up on this win-win roller coaster where everybody feels that we're all doing something and we are doing our small bit to help sustainability in the world and to help battle climate change. And it's increasingly an issue. It's a thing. Now, these numbers are big. It's not 12% of employees, 3% of employees. It's 44, 50, 60, 70% of employees. These are big numbers. And even things like 44% were annoyed that their company was still using plastic bags. More than half said they'd be more likely to work for a company that provides tools or resources to become more sustainable. And in young people, it's even more dramatic. 62% of 25 to 34-year-olds. So there's a real consensus, I think, that this report puts its finger on. And as it decides and defines that, it doesn't say this is complicated and difficult and you have to tear your hair out. It's basically saying, start. Yeah? Start somewhere. Move a little bit. And your employees will love you for it and come with you.
Yeah, I think there are two final things I would pick up on. Firstly, that 39% about the most important behaviour change that must happen is companies making changes to their operations and business model. That's what people, 39% of people feel that, and that's the most important behaviour change that can happen. The thing is that, I mean, that may sound like a statement of the obvious, but this is massively to do with transformation. So it's a huge challenge for some industry sectors. They are only beginning to get their heads around what would mean like. I mean, in terms of operating models will change and will change dramatically, which will have a massive impact on the skills required. So this all feeds into the skills gaps and skills development within the business. But again, it comes down to communication, because nearly 50% of employees currently think that their company's sustainability actions make a difference.
Yeah.
So actually, even if you are doing stuff, you know, it might be that you might have half of your employees not even knowing that you're doing stuff in this area. So I think you know, I mentioned communications earlier. I think a lot of this is obviously you've got to have a clear vision, but you've also got to really start engaging the workforce around sustainability and be communicating that properly. I think that's a big message from this bit of research, I think, is that actually people do accept their individual responsibility on the whole, and that's really positive. And now they're looking to the organisation to lead them so that they know what they should be doing now and into the future. And that's all about having a plan, but really communicating that regularly.
Yeah, staff want to set companies to set sustainability targets for the short and the long term. Business leaders are talking about becoming B Corp certified, eliminating the use of unsustainable materials, and having some kind of process for acting more sustainably step by step as they go forward. So there's a great alignment here, Martin. There's no great battle between a management who are saying we don't care and staff who are saying we have to do this. It seems to me like that it's being handed to organizations on a plate to build credibility with their staff and to work together on something that will benefit everybody. And everyone is pushing against an open door. So in that sense, I think you've chosen a very, very interesting and useful report. And as I said, if I were a CEO, I would read this with great interest, and I'd be putting it around my executive team and saying, what are we going to do? Think about this. What is our agenda? And I'd be talking to staff and saying, well, I have read this report. I would like to know how you think our priorities should line up over the next six months to 2 years, and then we'll come up with a sustainability plan signed off by both staff and the company, and we'll work towards it. And that will increase engagement, profitability, and everything else. Fantastic. You know, it's really good that such a clear, clean report has come out with such definitive conclusions. You know, I think it's well worth a read. And as you can see the crawl on the screen, it's entirely free. And it's available now for downloading. It's 23 pages. It's a good read for 23 pages, I think. Any final points?
No, I'd reflect what you've just said. I think, you know, this is a huge area. I don't think we see enough of it being talked about in HR and learning circles. This report is about behaviour change, which is at the very heart of what learning does. So I think there are lots of hooks here for learning teams as well. The thing is, it's not coming from the traditional learning perspective. You know, this is a much bigger challenge for all organisations, but learning has an important part to play in it. And I think, you know, I see HR and learning teams having to get their heads around this very quickly, and then really being very clear about how they can help with that whole behaviour change piece.
Yeah, thank you. I'm grateful to you, Martin, for drawing it to not much just mine, but everybody's attention. And I hope it has an impact. Thanks very much. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Nigel.
That's it for another month, Kate. It was a really good program, and what really struck me were the three major items, all struck different kinds of chords. The first one was the neuroscience from Amy, saying that if we really care about learning, we can't ignore the lessons from neuroscience, and I think that's a very good message. Then Gemma Towsey also reminded us that craft is important. This isn't just about flashing around, doing things randomly. It's about developing and sustaining a craft. And then Martin...
And a practice. It's about being purposeful, I think, as well.
Being purposeful, yes, exactly, yes. Being conscious of what you want to do.
Yeah.
And then Martin is saying, but there's a much bigger agenda out there, which is the way in which we think about our role and the way in which we interact with organizations. And we need to be more focused on sustainability. So we had kind of something from the brain to the big picture down to the craft, all important aspects of the work that we do, I think, and all drawn attention to in one program. So that made it a very useful, interesting, and articulate
really nice and
program.
Varied. Yeah.
Varied and linked at the same time. Yes. You agree with me? Good. So what else is coming up for us over the next couple of months?
It's rare I disagree with you, Nigel, in fairness. We have, it's very exciting because, you know, events are starting to come back. So there is a hybrid working conference that the CIPD are running on the 5th of April. I don't know if you can attend both virtually and in person. On the 20th to the 22nd of April, Learning Solutions is back in Orlando in America, obviously. 4th to the 5th of May, it's the biggie. Learning Technologies postponed from February, but coming back to London, which is very exciting. And 15th to 16th of June is the CIPD Festival of Work.
So, all of those events, Kate, what about you? What are you going to be doing?
Well, obviously never a dull moment in my world, but very excited. Unleash America is back, our first show back post-COVID. It's coming to Las Vegas at the end of May. Obviously, learning is one of the 4 pillars that we cover. We also cover future of work, talent and recruitment, and core HR, which is a big area in and of itself. So learning and skills is just one part of that. But I would like to bet that I'll have some good goss and some good insights to share off the back of it when I come back in June.
So that will be in the June programme, and our next programme goes out on the 31st of March. So keep note of that in your diaries, and we'll see you then.
See you then.